Okay, so I wanted to make a video real quick on a topic that I saw that was being discussed on an online talk tennis forum that I disagreed with. And the post was that Carlos Alcaraz was quote unquote mostly average in 2023. So I thought about it and thought, yeah, this is a ridiculous post. That's clearly not the case. But then some people were doubling down and saying that they were serious. Like, he seriously had an average year. He didn't have a good season. To which I retorted, well, he won a slam and he finished number 2 in the world. So it's not possible for you to have a average season when you do that. But as such, let's just go through his year and see if he truly was so terrible outside of that one Wimbledon final. So Carlos Alcaraz started out the year in Buenos Aires. He did not play in the Australian Open. In the Buenos Aires 250, he won. He beat Cam Norrie in the final, number 12 in the world. In the Rio 500, a week later, he got to the final, and Cam Norrie got his revenge, and he beat him in a 3-set match. So first loss of the year for Carlos Alcaraz was in the final of an ATP 500 against a fringe top 10 player that has defeated him before. He lost to Norrie in Cincinnati last year. So this is a player that has shown that he can give Alcaraz problems. So then we transition over into the Sunshine Double with the Indian Wells Masters tournament, and he wins. He plays informed Daniil Medvedev in the final and snaps his 20-plus win streak that he was on after the Australian Open. He beat him quite easily. I think it was 6-3, 6-2, and I think he got the number 1 ranking back at the time. So then we move on to the Miami Masters, where he gets to the semifinal and loses to Jannik Sinner. Sinner at this point still around a fringe top 10 player, but again has also beaten Alcaraz in tournaments previously, and most notably at a slam. So the first 4 results of the year before we get to the big clay court swing, he wins 2 out of 4 tournaments. He reaches the final in another one and the semifinal in another one. He wins his first big title of the year, beating the eventual world number 3 in the final. And the 2 losses he had were against fringe top 10 players that had defeated him before. So nothing about this shows me that Carlos Alcaraz has been average so far. He did not suffer any bad losses. He went deep in every tournament he played, and he went 2 for 4. So then we start off the clay court season in Barcelona. He plays Stefanos Tsitsipas in the final, world number 5, and defeats him 6-3, 6-4. Objectively good result, followed by a win in the Madrid Masters, beating surprise finalist Jan-Lennard Struff in, I believe it was 3 sets. So starting off the clay court season really well. Then we get to the Rome Masters tournament, where he loses in the 3rd round to qualifier Fabian Marochan. I think he was world number 135 and loses in straight sets, 6-3, 7-6. So at this point, we're getting to his first slam of the year since he missed the Australian Open, and this is the only bad loss that he's had against Fabian Marochan. That's the only bad loss so far. So we'll put a mark next to it, as it's his only bad loss of the season so far. So then we go on to Roland Garros in the semifinal. He plays Novak Djokovic. He splits the first 2 sets, suffers from cramps, loses 6-1, 6-1 to bow out of Roland Garros. Carlos Alcaraz had been playing really well that slam. He just was not fit, and he played Novak Djokovic for the first time ever in a Grand Slam tournament, which is a tall task on a young player, a young 20-year-old. I believe he was 20 at the time, who's going up against the greatest player ever in a slam semifinal, So that was more due to his nerves, and again, losing to the greatest player of all time, who just won his 23rd slam a couple days later, is not a bad loss. So then we transition over into the grass court season, and Alcaraz does a sweep. He opens up with the Queen's 500 where he wins. He defeats Alex de Minaur, a fringe top 10 player, in the final. And then he gets to the Wimbledon. We get to Wimbledon, and he achieves probably the biggest result of his career. He gets to the final and defeats 4-time defending champion and 7-time champion Novak Djokovic in a 5-set thriller. And this was where the hype was real with Carlos Alcaraz. The hype was absolutely real. People were saying Novak's never going to win a slam again. He would, but to each their own. And this was really the last great result that Alcaraz had going into the final stretch of the season, which includes the US Open. So we then move on to the United States, North America, and he starts off in Toronto with the Toronto Masters, where he loses in the quarterfinal against Tommy Paul. Tommy Paul, same exact situation as Cam Norrie, fringe top 10 player who has defeated him before. This was the same exact result, fringe top 10 player. They're elite players, right? Just because they're not in the top 10 and they're like 11, 12, 13, 14 does not mean that they're not elite players. Loses in the quarterfinal to Tommy Paul. Cincinnati Masters tournament, gets to the final, loses to Novak Djokovic in probably the best 3-set match of the year. What was the score? I think it was 7-5, 6-7, 6-7. So you get to the final, you play the best player ever after you just beat him at Wimbledon, and you lose. You held match points, but you lose. You put up a great fight. Nothing wrong with that. There was nothing wrong with that. Then we get into the US Open, where he reaches the semifinals, loses in 4 sets to world number 3, Daniil Medvedev. Medvedev, former US Open champion, former world number 1. That is not a bad loss. Medvedev just outplayed him, plain and simple. So now we're done with the slams, and we move on into his last 4 tournaments of the year. We start out in Beijing in the 500, where he reaches the semifinal and loses to Jannik Sinner. Sinner at this point is no longer a fringe top 10 player. He is now an established top 5 player on the ATP Tour and would later win the final against Daniil Medvedev, so that is not a bad loss. Shanghai Masters 1000, gets to the 4th round, loses to Grigor Dimitrov. This is where it's a bit convoluted for me, because on one hand I want to say it is a bad loss because Dimitrov was, I think, around number 20, 21, 22-ish in the world, so it could be seen as a bad loss. But at the same time, you look at the fact that Dimitrov reached the Paris Masters final just a week or so later. He defeated Daniil Medvedev down the stretch. He defeated Andrei Rublev down the stretch. I'm not sure if he defeated Jannik Sinner. Could be wrong there. So you look at that and you see, well, Dimitrov, he beat Alcaraz. Then he backed it up. He beat Medvedev. And he got to a Masters 1000 final where he lost to Djokovic. So you look at that and you think, is that really a bad loss? And I'm going to put that up as a question mark. I think it's a questionable result, but I don't know if I want to call it a bad result. Then we get to the Paris Masters tournament. This is de facto a first round for him. You got to buy in the first round, and he loses to Roman Safulin, qualifier. This is a bad result. He lost to the world number 45, so that is a bad loss. So then we head over to the ATP World Tour Finals. 1,500 points are at stake. Carlos Alcaraz, at this point, has had kind of a rough go of it after the US Open. He gets to the ATP Finals. He finishes 2-1 in the group. His one loss was against Sasha Zverev, number 6 player in the world, number 7, something like that. So that's not a bad loss. Gets into the semifinals after he defeats Medvedev and I believe Rublev in the group stages, and he faces Novak Djokovic, where he loses 6-3, 6-2. One of the worst losses in his career. But at the same time, he didn't just lose to anybody. He lost to Novak Djokovic. So you kind of look at that and you think, well, what are you really going to say about that? You know, what exactly are you going to say when you lose to Novak Djokovic in a tennis match? I mean, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal have lost more times to Novak Djokovic than anybody. So you look at that and you sort of think to yourself, that can't be a bad loss. Although he didn't play great, it can't be a bad loss. So all this combined, notable tournaments missed from his calendar. He missed the Australian Open, the first slam of the year. He missed the Acapulco 500. He withdrew from that. He withdrew from the Monte Carlo 1000 tournament due to fatigue from his Miami loss to Sinner. He was still injured at the Australian Open, and I believe he also withdrew from Acapulco due to fatigue. And then down the stretch, he withdrew from the Hamburg and Basel 500s, which were both on his schedule. So then we look at a total summary of what he did in the year compared to some other players. 65-12 record, 84.4%. He won 6 titles, 3 big titles, including a slam. His year-end rank is down from the year before where he finished world number 1. He finished world number 2. His points are up. Last year he finished with around 6,000 points to clinch the year-end world number 1 ranking. This year his points shot up to 8,855. So you look at that and you think that can't be an average season. You know, nearly an 85%, win percentage over the tour. He won a slam. He won 2 Masters events, one on hard court, one on clay. He successfully defended a Masters tournament for the first time in his career. He won Wimbledon for the first time in his career. And he achieved 36 weeks at world number 1 during 2023. It's not like he wasn't world number 1. So you look at all that and you look at his losses then, his 12 losses. So you look at Cam Norrie, French top 10 players beaten him before. Sinner, French top 10 player at the time who had beaten him before. Fabien Marchand, qualifier world number 135. That's his one bad loss so far. Novak Djokovic, Roland Garros semifinals, not a bad loss. It's the world number 1. Toronto 1000 quarterfinal against Tommy Paul, French top 10 player who has defeated him before. So again, just like these two, this cannot be a bad loss. They're still elite top 10, 15 players that sometimes get the better of Carlos Alcaraz. Cincinnati Masters tournament, lost Djokovic in the final, world number 1's not a bad loss. U.S. Open semifinal against Medvedev, he lost. That's the world number 3, that's not a bad loss. Beijing 500 semifinal, Sinner at this point, top 5 player in the world, not a bad loss. Shanghai Masters tournament, 4th round, lost to Dimitrov, is a bit on the fringe. Again, it's bad because looking at Dimitrov's ranking, kind of the gap between the two, but then you also look at the fact that Dimitrov had a great run at the end of the year and secured, I think, number 13 or 14 in the world, which is his highest year-end position in years. And then you get to Roman Safiullin, his truly second bad loss of the year, and then he loses to Zverev, a player who's beaten him before, who's an elite top 5, 10 player on the ATP Tour for years now. That's not a bad loss. And then he loses in the semifinals to Novak Djokovic, world number 1, not a bad loss. So 2 losses of the year were terrible for Alcaraz. 1 loss was questionable, and the rest I think are very on par for him. Now you look at him compared to Novak Djokovic and Daniil Medvedev, the world number 1 and the world number 3, who he was sandwiched between. He was down 2,390 points against Djokovic the year at number 1. I believe so, or was it 3,390? I'm not completely certain on that number, but I do know it was quite a big gap. But against Daniil Medvedev, he was up 1,255 ranking points. For the year-end head-to-head, he went 1-3 against Novak Djokovic for a 2-3 overall head-to-head. He had defeated him at the 2022 Madrid Open in a 3-setter in the semifinals. This year, he goes 1-3 against him. He opens up against Djokovic with a loss at Roland Garros, gets revenge, beats him at Wimbledon, loses in Cincinnati, and loses the Tour Finals for that 1-3 head-to-head in the year. against Daniil Medvedev. He goes 3-1 against Medvedev for 3-2 overall head-to-head. He lost to him at Wimbledon in 2021. This year, he defeats Medvedev at Indian Wells. He defeats Medvedev at Wimbledon in the semifinals, loses to him at the U.S. Open semifinals, and then he beats him again in the group stage at the ATP finals. So gets that 3-1 head-to-head for the year. So you look at this and you have to think, how is all of this average? How is it possible that this is all average? This is not average. It's impossible for this to be an average tennis season. And my theory and what I believe is happening and why people genuinely think this was an average or not good season, I think there's one reason, and I think this guy plays 1/3 of it, and that is the big three. I think the big three have kind of skewed our expectations of tennis players and how good they should be, because we've seen the big three win pretty much every single slam tournament every single year, stretching back to 2003. And the trend didn't stop this year. Djokovic won 3 out of 4 slams in 2023. So it's been going on for 20 years that the big three have dominated the sport, and they were winning every single week, right? So if for instance, Djokovic didn't win Indian Wells, Nadal or Federer would win it. For instance, in Wimbledon, if Fed wouldn't win it, Nadal or Djokovic would win it. If we get to the tour finals, if Djokovic didn't win it, Fed would win it. If Fed would win it, Djokovic would win it. So you look at that and you think, well, they've swept pretty much everything year after year after year. And the simplest explanation is that they're anomalies. Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic are complete anomalies in the sport. Federer has 20 slams, Nadal has 22, Djokovic has 24. Novak Djokovic is up 10 slams on Pete Sampras, which sounds ridiculous, but he is. Rafael Nadal doubles Bjorn Borg's slam count. Sounds ridiculous, but it's true. These guys were way too good for 20 plus years. Were way too good and were beating literally everybody, so that it makes something like this an objectively good season where he improved. Yes, improved. He has a higher points total this year than last year, so he improved. Yet we still think he had a mostly average season in 2023, which to me is extremely shocking. He had a tough end to the year, but 4 tournaments out of a big chunk here, where if you take out Beijing, Shanghai, Paris, and the tour finals, he played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 tournaments, and he won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. 6 tournament wins in 13 is not a joke, right? This is way better than the numbers not Alcaraz, that's Zverev, Tsitsipas, Rublev, and even Medvedev have been able to put up in the last 5 or so years. So in short, he has not had a mostly average season. This was a good season for Carlos Alcaraz, where he missed a couple notable tournaments, won a lot of big tournaments, won a Grand Slam, and improved on his points total from last year. And again, the only player he lost out to in the year-end rankings was a guy that won 3 slams. So again, we need to really think about it and see that in 17 tournaments they played, he had 2.5 bad losses, and I don't think that qualifies enough for him to have had an average season. I think people are still comparing him to the big three, which is completely unfair. He is not on the level of the big three. He can get to the level. I'm not saying it's impossible for him to win a lot of slams in the future, but right now we're looking at it, it's, come on. I mean, 20 slams is something that was unthinkable before Fed showed up, and then 2 other guys did it. So it's not possible for this to be a mostly average season. Carlos Alcaraz had an objectively good season on the ATP Tour. I think he's looking forward to 2024. This guy's aging. He's not getting younger. Nadal's coming back, but again, he's even older than Djokovic. I think Alcaraz is looking at 2024. He wants to win Roland Garros. He wants to defend Wimbledon. He wants to get back in Medvedev at the US Open. He wants to make a splash at the Australian Open, as he hasn't really done anything there and did withdraw this year due to an injury. So you look at all this, you look at his results. For me, not an average season, a very good season, and I'm very excited to see what he is going to do in 2024. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support of the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.